Morning, everyone. Kira Kimball here, greeting you again from my kitchen table in Sioux Falls. I'm so excited to be with you here today for our 5th installment of Building Inclusive and Equitable Workplaces. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for Marsh & McLennan Agency and a passionate diversity, equity, and inclusion educator. And this is going to be a topic that I hope you all will lean into. And I will be leaving you with many tactics for you to take to go and start thinking about how you can implement these in your workplaces. So believe it or not, we are already at the last third of our series together. Next week will be our final installment with creating a DE&I scorecard. So I hope that you will be joining us for that session as well. Our learning outcomes today: recruitment strategies and hiring practices to attract diverse talent, retention and engagement strategies for diverse talent that can be applied across your whole organization and really for all colleagues. How to create an inclusive workplace where employees can show up wholly as themselves. And finally, really thinking about your employer brand and how committing to DE&I in your workplace can elevate it. Just a brief spot on this page. You know I'm relentless about it. And for any new friends who are joining us, it's important to think about diversity holistically. I know by next week, you'll all be able to rattle out these dimensions without actually looking at this honeycomb screen. So let's jump right in today. First off, let's talk a little bit about employer brand and really what it is. An employer brand is your value proposition as an organization. It's really how you can go about as an employer to attract and retain talent in your organization. Your employer brand is really your reputation as a place to work and how your team members or vendors or community partners talk about you in the community and in the marketplace. Your employer brand is really your workplace culture and how you describe that to be and how it shows up in terms of how you do work together inside and outside your walls. And then finally, it's really the company identity you have in the community. Certainly you have a corporate or an industry brand, but your employer brand transcends that. And it tells your story as an employer outside of your walls. So when we think about creating an employer brand, it's incredibly important to be intentional. And one of the hats that I wear in my organization is really to help define that employer brand and then make sure that we're lifting that. I want you to know, though, if you don't intentionally create that brand and live into how you define it to be, your employees are going to talk about it outside of the workplace. And it's often your ex-employees, those individuals who leave or you ask them to leave, who will be the loudest about talking about your employer brand. So it's very critical for organizations to think about their industry brand, but also what the brand is for employees and how they might tell that story outside of the workplace. So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you've heard me share the statistic before. Over 86% of job seekers say that workplace diversity is an important factor for when they're looking for a job. So right now in the marketplace, when workforce development is a fierce activity for most industries, if not all industries, it's very important for employers to realize committing to DE&I is that differentiator for you. But because job seekers are looking for diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces, they're also looking for how does that align with the behaviors. So you see this little graphic of the head walking one way, the talk, and then the walking the other way. This is something that employees and those who are seeking to join your organizations notice. So the congruence behind your message and your action is critical. You've heard me talk about the dangers of optics, that we don't want to just be for talk. So really keep this in mind. And I can share that yesterday morning, I was with the NDSU Sales Center students and I was wearing my internship program hat. and talking about our organization. But I made sure to include in my bullet points because, again, I understand that Gen Z is interested in DE&I in the workplace, to talk about our efforts to become more inclusive and equitable at Marsh & McLennan Agency. That's an employer brand activity, if you will, to share with your prospective talent how you show up in the DE&I space. So I'm curious, of all the businesses who are online today, I'd like you to participate in this poll and really thinking about, based on how I just described employer brand, please complete the poll on if you have a strategy. Yes, no, or maybe this isn't your space, so you're not completely sure, and then answer, I don't know. I'll be interested in this because really when I think of conversations and concepts that are really bubbling up for human resources colleagues and businesses, employer brand is a newer type of concept and conversation. So I'm curious to see if in the Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo, and I know you've got businesses around the state participating because I hear from them, which is great. Do you have an employer brand strategy? We get very intentional about talking about our culture, about our community engagement, about continuous learning and diversity, equity, inclusion as part of Marsh & McLennan Agency's employer brand. So when we are out right now at virtual internship fairs, as an example, we really are making sure we're connecting with our prospective talent, our pipeline, to share who we are as an employer, besides being an awesome part of the insurance industry. So it looks like I've got the chat here. I'm going to take a peek. Do you have an employer brand? It looks like many of you do, and half of you don't. So this hopefully will be an opportunity for you today to take a peek at what strategizing really could look like for you. So let's talk about diverse talent recruitment. And again, I invite you to grab your phone, take a picture of the slides, take a quick snip, however that works for you, but also know that our good friends at the Chamber will be posting this online. But I really wanted to come to you with tactics. So for those of you who lead recruitment building and talent sourcing, that you can walk away with some things that you can bring to your teams and to really sit down and roll up your sleeves and decide what are areas that you want to start learning, what are practices you want to change, and really looking at your policies. Now, you know that the place that I started really with this series was looking at inclusive leadership, unconscious bias, and cultural competencies after we built the business case. Those are really critical. And why I start there is because those are about the inclusion and equity types of activities that build the culture that will allow you to bring in the diverse talent. Sometimes businesses get so excited, they want to start thinking differently about their diverse talent sourcing right away without thinking about the culture, without thinking about policies and practices and making sure that they are inclusive and equitable for all. So I would argue a best practice in this space is really to think about your inclusion and equity standards and practices before diving into inviting diverse talent into your workplace. But let's talk about some of these really, really good tactics that you can take to go. So when you're thinking about talent sourcing and diverse talent sourcing, it's important to look at how you show up externally. If individuals are going to look at your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook profile, maybe they will go out onto Handshake if you work with colleges and universities, but most definitely your website. The major majority of organizations, even small businesses, have some sort of digital presence. So it's really important that you show up digitally in the way that you want to attract talent. Now, I will caution you, and I caution my MMA colleagues, that it's important when we go to a career fair, as an example, or we're a vendor in an industry trade show, as an example, we want to make sure that we're authentic and genuine in how we show up. So for my organization, it wouldn't be authentic and genuine and really communicating who we are in a truthful way if our booth, our table were filled with our Black colleagues, because that is not something that we have a lot of at MMA. So people of color, and that's something that we are really aspiring to. but it makes sense to have some diverse representation in your communications, just being authentic about it, because over portraying diversity is really going to not send that accurate message to an individual who might say, yes, I'm going to take this job because I know that there are a lot of people who look like me. So as we begin these journeys in our communities, it's important for us to be really truthful. But at the same point, you want to show up and to attract the kind of a talent you're looking for. So think of that in your marketing materials, in your paper assets, in your websites, to make sure it's representing diversity. And in some organizations, I think of construction, manufacturing, agribusiness, even my industry, financial services, gender diversity is a step in the right direction. So consider those opportunities and work with your marketing and communications teams. Secondly, I hope you all had a chance to look at the unconscious bias webinar recording, because this is critical for anyone who's involved in the hiring process. Our HR colleagues who are really driving strategy and building that framework, understanding how affinity bias might play out, meaning extending more to people who are like you, or confirmation bias. This person is from where I'm from. They went to where I went to school. I'm really interested in them. So there are just a couple types of things. The examples of names and seeing an individual's name can sometimes trigger something unconsciously. So it's really important to level set and to train. I'm a big fan of training your whole team, but I also know sometimes we need to break our progress into steps. So if you can start with your hiring managers, your HR team, that's critical for you. Along with that, cultural competencies, which we talked about last time, can be really important, especially if where your opportunity is to hire individuals who are maybe from the immigrant or refugee population, or individuals whose country of origin is different from the United States. If those are folks that you might be interacting with and inviting into your organization, developing competencies would be critical in this space too. Look at your job descriptions. Look at the kind of language that shows up in your job descriptions. We know that there is some language that is going to help an individual who identifies as a man or an individual who identifies as a woman either apply for a position or say that's not for them. So when you think of language, that's really critically important. There are some tools, Textio is an example, that can help you evaluate job descriptions to make sure that all individuals would have access to saying this is for me. So when you think of some language, sometimes aggressive, because that's kind of a go-getter language, but aggressive might turn off women. So maybe you're going to want to use self-motivated as an example. Independent also may turn off some women, not all women, but very much women are collaborative, team-oriented. And I'm not trying to stereotype, because you know that I'm not for that, but we know that language can be limiting. And when you're trying to create your talent pool, it's important. So if maybe independent, maybe it is self-motivated as an example. So really looking at your language and how it might exclude someone or some group, and try to make it a little bit more neutral. And then I would also invite you to think about how you define the skills on your job descriptions. And when you're thinking about different populations, again, both of our communities have refugee, immigrant settlements, new Americans who are coming from different countries who might do economics differently, engineering differently, healthcare differently, and that they may have some other skills along with that. So it's important to use language that will allow individuals from different countries to see themselves in that pathway. So the job description is really critical to be evaluated. This is something that you can get feedback on as HR people. Checking in with your diverse colleagues as part of a focus group, and ask them to help you review some of those descriptions. And then when you're thinking about recruiting and planning that interview strategy, determine if you have goals around the number of individuals who would identify as diverse. That's something your organization would choose, and decide if you have a goal. Now, remember, this is not about quota setting. That's really important for us to all remember. This is more about deciding who you want to be as an organization and how that's going to show up in your practices. So again, if you're part of the manufacturing industry and you're trying to grow women talent as part of the diversity spectrum, consider that conversation when you're setting goals around the candidates that you're going to interview. The interviewing process, what does this look like? There's an opportunity for us to really mask demographics and to try to minimize unconscious bias through an individual's name. As an example, when we see names that are maybe from not the majority or from underrepresented communities, there's a great video out on YouTube about Jose, who changes his name from Jose on his resume to Joe. He sends his resume out to the same people as Jose and the same people as Joe. He gets the interviews with the Joe resume. So it's critical for us to realize that even a name might elicit a response to create an opportunity for someone to workforce or to deny that. So really consider blinding perhaps some of the identifying information of applicants besides their skills and strengths. I would invite you to really consider creating a diverse search committee. And it's very important that not one person is just doing this work, because that's where unconscious bias can go unchecked. So when you're thinking about that, bring in other people from the department, other hiring managers to be part of that process. So you can also reflect that this is important to you as an organization. And that might be two people, but they're not all like me. The other person is not going to be represent my demographics, if you will. So really consider that, because that's going to help with unconscious bias. It's also going to communicate your commitment as an organization. This next one in the upper blue box is really critical, and it's sometimes hard for employers to commit to, but it's very important if you are trying to be an equitable business interested in diverse people. So you want to create your list of interview questions prior to your candidate coming in. And this is for all positions, no matter where they are in the organization. And it's critical that those same questions, whether they're 10 or 15 or 6, are asked for each one of the candidates. That allows you to have more quantitative, if you will, way to evaluate, because you're assessing them on the same types of core questions. This doesn't mean that there might not be a secondary prompt question based on their answer that might be different for candidate 1, 2, 3, 4 as an example, but your core efforts should really be consistent around your interview pool, and that will help you evaluate them in an inclusive and equitable manner. The next blue box, when you're interviewing people, I really encourage you to at least have 2 partners helping with this. Again, being able to highlight if my partner said, hey, Kira, I was noticing you going down this pathway and I'm wondering what that may have been about. So allow each other to kind of process the interview in and of itself and to do some checks for any bias that might have shown up. And if you are interviewing international individuals or people whose language is not primarily English, consider offering an interpreter. If you are looking to fill positions, you want your applicants to have the best opportunity to show up with the value that they can bring to your organization. So that might be a consideration that you budget for, to allow that person really to express their gifts, their talents, and their experience. If a meal is part of the interview process, I know some industries and organizations might have a 2-day interview process or an over the course of the day interview process. Some of us, we've got an hour, that's what we do, and we can make that decision. But if this is more of a formal process where you'll be introducing others to smaller groups, I think of, education. When I was in education, I had a couple-day interviews usually for positions with many stakeholders. And if there is a meal involved, show up as the organization that you want to be as committing to DE&I and talk with them about that meal. Get their feedback so they know that, wow, this employer is on target with this. They care about individuals. They want to show up with some cultural competency or really paying attention to the individual. So put that on your to-do list to check with the candidate about food. Share your mission and vision during the interview process. Don't just solely talk about the technical expertise, the subject matter that you need, the role that you're trying to fill, but talk about the employer brand part of it, because that's where an employee is going to lean in. And if they're interviewing at other places, this could be the differentiator for you, that maybe the position is the same at 3 other places, but the company is not. And when workforce is so fierce out there in the marketplace, this can help you in terms of attracting talent. So sharing your mission, vision, and values, and talking about your diversity statement as an example, or how you value inclusiveness and equity in your organization, and invite them to answer. This is important to us. I'm curious how we might expect to see you help us live into this vision, or help us lift our efforts in our organization. It, one, tells that candidate, wow, this employer is interested in this. But 2, it also gives you an opportunity to evaluate an individual who's going to align with your mission, vision, and values and your statement as a DE&I organization. All right, let's look at the actual offering, hiring, and onboarding process. And again, I acknowledge that in different industries and for different positions, the actual interview process might be short, it might be long, it might involve different types of activities. It might be a presentation, it might be leading a class, it might be talking about research, it might be talking about best practices for concrete manufacturing, whatever it might be. But the same kinds of activities are going to happen no matter what the industry or the kind of job. So when we really think about making that offer, hiring and onboarding an individual, I would invite you to consider these steps as best practices. So you really want to describe your value proposition. Again, what are you offering to this employee over and above? And when you think about that diverse employee, however they show up in that honeycomb spectrum, and some things are not going to be identified. An individual may not come in and say, I celebrate the Muslim faith. They may not say, I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community. In fact, there's a likelihood that they will not. But there are ways that individuals will share their diversity. And when you prompt them with some of the questions on the previous slides, it might give them an indication of psychological safety, which is something we've talked about, and they may be willing to share more about themselves. And that can be a great opportunity for you. So as an employer, you really want to talk about that value proposition and how you create inclusivity and equity in your organization, and describing what that looks like, whether it's the type of holidays that you celebrate, the type of education that you offer to your colleagues in terms of unconscious bias training, the way that you might have mentoring programs for underrepresented colleagues or team members. But it's important when you're working with diverse talent, if they are part of your pool, when they are part of your pool, to really communicate our commitment as an organization to equity and inclusivity, because that's going to give them an idea about, I can be myself here, I can show up safely here, my organization that I want to join is committed to this. So again, it might give an easier yes because you're sharing those practices. Reviewing your actual offer is critical, and making sure that bias, unconscious or conscious, is not showing up in that wage. We know that in today's marketplace, when talent is going out and searching for a job, it's not just the wage, the salary they're looking for. That compensation benefits oftentimes makes up 30, 33, 35% of our compensation as an employee. But when you're sitting down with your team, your hiring team, or you're going back to your HR colleague and you're trying to identify the wage that you're going to go out with, it's really important to lean into equity in this conversation if you're an organization who's committing to DE&I. And it's really important to have written down, no matter the size of your organization, small, Main Street, large, national, to have that standard written down, whether it's in a spreadsheet, online protocol, however you do that. And to not be swayed by making decisions about someone's wage because of how they present themselves. It's really critical to look at what they have done and what they can do in their resume in the interview process. I can give you some examples. So if I am a construction firm, as an example, and we know in the construction industry, there's great opportunities to bring in women into construction firms. So if I'm potentially making an offer to a woman, it's important for me, if this woman graduated as a civil engineer from NDSU, and I want to make sure that I'm going to give her the same offer that I would for another entry-level engineer graduate from a university. And that I won't say things like, hey, this is, we don't have a lot of women in our organization, and I'm just not sure about it. And let's go out a couple dollars lower, $5 lower, or $10,000 lower, whatever that might be, because of that. And individuals do get swayed by these things, and that's where legality can really step in. So we want to be conscientious of that. Also thinking about our new Americans. If you do hire someone, and I know many of you do, who came from a different country, maybe it was Latin America, Mexico, Africa, don't be swayed by thinking, well, when this person was working in Mexico for this job, they got paid this. I'm not sure we have to go out with our regular old salary. Again, don't be tempted by those things. Or when you're working with people with maybe a disability and you're making some accommodations so they can work and do the things that they are skilled at doing, but in a way that allows them to be successful. Don't compromise their wage because you're making accommodations. Those are tempting things. And I know this because I hear these conversations. So the more that you can have written down in terms of level 1, level 2, level 3, promotion, however it shows up in your business, it's critical. And I'm working right now with an organization in the construction field to really dive into this and make sure their pay equity is the same across women and new Americans, because they are employing more and more of both. So after you're bringing this person and someone says, yes, I'm so excited, you showed up throughout the interview process as an employer who values diversity, I feel I can be myself here, I'm saying yes, it's important that you look at your onboarding process. This is one thing that my firm has really committed to in the last couple of years that I'm very excited about. We are incredibly intentional about creating a pathway for the first 90 days of onboarding a new team member. And we define who that onboarding team would be. It might be the HR person, the hiring manager. We have a technical mentor. We have a cultural mentor. So it's a village, if you will, or a team that really is going to come alongside that new person. We do this for all people. So again, going back to that honeycomb of diversity and sometimes not knowing how an individual will show up on the spectrum of diversity, if you will, this is a best practice that allows everybody to feel welcome into your organization. And when we can, as employers, create that stickiness and really show that culture of care and belonging up front, that's going to help with their onboarding and them diving deep into learning their position and doing great things for your organization. So really think intentionally about who's going to help onboard this talent. And make sure that they are different people. They don't even all have to be from the same department. For us, if we bring in someone to business insurance, we have their cultural mentor maybe be from IT or from an employee health and benefits consulting, so they can get more of a well-rounded view of our organization. And when we define this team, then we move to the gold box where we're really building out who are they going to meet with over the next 90 days. Certainly a lot of this has to do with training for their position, and that is really critical. But we also put parts on their calendar that are going to include ways to learn about our organization. It might be going to a growing relationships and opportunities at work meeting, which lifts up our learning and development. It might be attending one of our Grow Talks on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We try to plug them into some sort of community engagement, volunteer outreach during that time. Little difficult right now during the state that we're in, but our better practice outside of COVID-19 would be to try to engage them in something outside of our office. Maybe it's going to an industry meeting as an example. And we try our best to introduce them to our leadership team. And I know this might be hard in some organizations to do all of these things, but what are some things that you could do that go over and above just training on the technical expertise this role needs to be in the grocery store, in the clinic, on the manufacturing floor, whatever that happens to be, to really introduce them and bring them into the organization to help them understand, here's how we care and how we show up for our employees and as a team. And then finally, you really want to have the opportunity to check in with your new talent. That is really critical. And I think one of the missteps is that sometimes we get so busy with our day-to-day, getting on that hamster wheel and all of the to-do lists that we have to accomplish, that we forget to be intentional with our new employees and to find out how they're feeling. And especially when you're bringing an individual into your organization who might show up differently, who might look differently. It's a person of color, a person who celebrates a different faith, you name what that difference might be, that it's really critical to reach out to them. And as an inclusive employer, that would be a practice that you would do. You would be interested in learning about how is the onboarding experience going? Who have you been meeting with? What have you been learning about us? Because you want to know what they're learning about, because really throughout that 90 days, you should have some learning outcomes. I want them to understand how we do training and development, how we show up in the community in terms of volunteer efforts, whatever defines your employer brand during those 90 days, you really want them to understand those things. Again, helping with that stickiness. You might want to check in with the mentors too, as the HR leader or the hiring manager, and ask them how things are going. So anything that you can do during that 90 days to define yourself as an inclusive organization is going to be critical for diverse talent, because they want to know, again, when we go back to the conversations about covering and psychological safety, those team members really want to have insight that you are for them. And it's so important when you're thinking about new talent like Gen Z, and keeping in mind this is one of their values. And yesterday I was talking with NDSU, and then I virtually flew down to USD and had some conversations with their School of Business students. And I actually am coaching them on, when you talk with employers, when you have the opportunity to ask them questions, ask them about their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it gives the students an opportunity to say, this is important to them, if it is, and then it gives you the opportunity to echo back how you are showing up as an employer. And this is not an unusual thing for students to hear. Many colleges and universities right now, for those of you who use those to attract talent, have diversity and community centers. They have initiatives in each one of their majors about the changing of demographics and buying power in this country and globally. So it's really part of their education. So as employers, we need to take the opportunity to shift and evolve right with that talent we are trying to attract. And if university college students is not your pool of talent, we still know the demographics in our communities have greatly changed, and that if we're working for that workforce, it is critical for us to develop those cultural competencies, to slow down and shift our unconscious biases, and to create that workplace where all people can be welcome. So we've talked about setting up the practice, if you will, for recruiting, for interviewing, for onboarding, but where do we go to find diverse talent? That's a question that I get a lot in my community and area, is about diverse talent sourcing. And it's so important to be intentional. And as I've talked about throughout all of these sessions, that it's important to find yourself, if you're really committed to this, if you really want to enjoy the benefit of becoming a more diverse organization from a brand perspective, from a revenue opportunity, from innovation opportunity, then you've got to be really committed to finding yourself as a recruiter, as a leader in places where you're meeting different people. And that can be as easy as saying, I want to meet with you for coffee. And these are things that I've done. I've reached out to different community members from different communities. And I've talked about how are some ways that you think I could maybe be introduced more to the Latinx community, or how about the Muslim community? And I have these real conversations with people, and have had super learnings about the value of posting job descriptions in ethnic grocery stores, as an example, or worship centers, to really show that we have an interest in this. And we have some organizations that I'm working with that are starting this practice and are getting some referrals that way. So networking is critical. And just remember, once you build your network, it's built. So there is a lot of intention. I would consider this front-ending your efforts, if you will, to build a network. But once you know your list of 12 people who you can send out job descriptions to, they will post, or maybe they will come together and help create a people of color network, as an example. That is a tool that you can use going forward, but it does take some effort front-ending. So think about your current talent sourcing practices. Do you always just post on this particular website and that's how you get your talent? Or you put an ad in the forum? However you show up, think about adding some alternative methods of talent sourcing to disrupt your paths, if you will, and try to create an opportunity for other people to be interested in your organizations. In the upper golden box, seek out organizations that come together and gather around diversity. We have a multicultural center here. We have a Sioux Falls Pride, the Veterans Office. Are there ways that you can collaborate with some of these organizations in your community? A multicultural center, and perhaps they have job boards. Maybe they have referral systems. Some multicultural centers, if you will, have an annual career fair. Can you show up there and be part of that career fair? Or is it a way to get involved and start volunteering? So that would be a way to potentially do different from the same old, and we're looking at that too, ways of how we go about recruiting talent. And then for those of you who are in industry organizations, and I'll go back to construction because I know the National Associated General Contractors Organization, and I know that construction is a big industry in your communities, that they have a national initiative called the Culture of Care. And what that initiative really is about is everything that we've been talking about over the last few weeks about inclusion, belonging, and equity. So for those of you who are involved in industry organizations, it might be the AGC, it might be the North Dakota Long-Term Care Association or the North Dakota Healthcare Association, the National Manufacturing Chapter in North Dakota, education, you name it. It's not unusual for industry associations to gather because it's helpful to come together as an industry and solve industry problems. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is certainly an opportunity. So for those of you who have industry organizations, maybe you're on the board or you're on a committee, I would encourage you, as industry associations are doing here, including the Society of Human Resource Managers, which my hunch is many of you are belonging to that organization or lean into it, sit down and have conversations around this. Is this something that we can lift together as an industry association? Could we create a job board or a resume repository that individuals who represent diversity, and again, this is something your organization would need to define, might be able to deposit their resume, or we might have access to that. So again, if you are getting committed to thinking differently about your organization and the talent that you hire, developing these strategies from an industry perspective could be very helpful. I've talked a little bit already about colleges and universities. Even high schools have organizations. So those of you who maybe recruit directly from high schools or technical colleges, as an example, they too have organizations that gather around diversity, whether it's a first generation college student organization, as an example. But that's a great way to connect. So maybe instead of solely connecting with the School of Education or the School of Healthcare or the business school, maybe it's also connecting with them, but then picking up the phone and finding out who's leading on my NDSU or Minnesota State University, Concordia, Grand Forks, Min State, who's leading the efforts on those college campuses. And we've had some people introduce me that are, and say, how can I work with your diversity and community center on campus to talk about our organization? Maybe you can come in and talk about your industry of biotech and provide some education. Or maybe it's your HR people coming in and giving a value add and training them on interviewing techniques, a number of different things. But again, it's about getting committed. And finally, you have a Professionals of Color network and your chamber, which is so wonderful. And one of my sorority sisters from a long time ago helped stand that up. And I'm really proud of that for North Dakota, because my city doesn't have that yet. And it's so critical. So how can you use the Professionals of Color network and bring together individuals who can give feedback about how to go about diverse talent sourcing, what's going to be attractive to them, and to really partner with individuals who have ideas and a lived experience about what going through the interview process is, what applying for jobs is like, and really use their knowledge and resources and find a collaborative effort. So there's a lot of pathways to this, and it does take some energy. But again, once you develop those relationships, they are yours to continue to capitalize on. So I've just gone through a lot of information, and I can definitely feel it. I'm curious, when you think about what I've presented before you, go ahead and complete this poll about how many of these diverse talent recruitment practices do you have in place in terms of having diverse talent sourcing partners, how you go about intentionally recruiting diverse talent, and then thinking about your interviewing process. What do your job descriptions look like? How are you posting them? Looking at your actual process of candidate selection. How many people are interviewing? Are you putting down those specific questions, asking them for all of your candidate pool? What does your onboarding process look like after you hire? Are you providing opportunities to bring them into the inclusion part of your organization right away, so those new employees, especially representing diverse backgrounds, can feel that, wow, this employer is interested in me as a person who represents diversity, and they value me. They see me as a difference maker in the organization, because again, that's really going to help with the retention and the engagement standpoint. So go ahead and participate in that poll, and I will be getting these results very shortly. I think they're coming in right now. All right, it looks like the majority of us are under 50%. And there's a great opportunity here then to start thinking about these practices. And what I really want to leave you with as we're going to the next stage of retention and engagement, you don't have to do it all at once. And I know sometimes it gets so overwhelming to know the opportunity. But when I work with organizations, and I just finished up a DE&I audit with one, I gave them a lot of recommendations, and then I invited them to prioritize them with me and to live into what they thought they could be successful at their first year out. And that's so important. So retention and engagement, use learning and development as a strategy to engage your diverse talent, to engage your talent as a whole. The beauty around everything we're discussing is that this is the next level engagement practice. While we're focusing on diverse talent, this is something that can help elevate your engagement strategy for all of your colleagues. So remember that today's job seekers, they're interested in continuous learning. They want to be invested in. Career pathing is a great opportunity. When you think about diversity sponsorship or mentoring programs, some organizations are now looking at their population And they're thinking about creating sponsorship programs for underrepresented individuals in their organization. It might be coming from a different cultural community, a different country, a different gender, someone who is maybe not reflected in the leadership and the decision making, and they're bringing together emerging leader programs and putting learning and development strategies, assigning mentors to those underrepresented individuals, and helping them develop throughout the organization. So that is an opportunity to really invest in your diverse talent. And again, thinking back about privilege, advantage, ease, what can I do to help bring people into my industry and develop their talent? Continuously look for opportunities to reward individuals who maybe are high performers, great team members, superintendents, whatever it might be for you, and use those as opportunities for learning. As opposed to just having learning and development be about learning, have it be about recognizing high performance. Have them see that this is a value. We want to invest in you because you're investing in our organization. So look at it as a recognition and reward initiative as well. When you're thinking about your underrepresented talent, and again, it might be the numbers of people, but it also might be the numbers of people who are not in leadership and manager roles, really create opportunities for them to stretch, giving special projects, investing in a small group, if you will, and helping them develop their strategies. This is an inclusion activity, but it's also an equity activity. And some employers, again, going back to the one that I'm working with now, when I was doing an analysis, an audit of their learning and development practices, what really bubbled up and was illuminated that they didn't have any equity built into learning and development. And what was just happening is that a manager might just train someone because maybe that manager likes to train them, or maybe they are more intentional about developing their people, whereas other managers might not do that, if you will. So what we're building right now is an equity process for being invested in, because that has everything to do with opportunity. When we develop people, we mentor them, we promote them, that gives them opportunity in the business. That also trickles out into their living, their standard of living, their opportunities for their families. So really thinking about career pathing, investment that is equitable for all people, and making sure that you're also looking at how you're promoting individuals, what types of roles people get, and can anyone be hired for any role? Or do you have a path that this type of person or this type of background might be well suited for over here, but maybe not here? So again, you want to be intentional about creating those career paths, writing them down, understanding what those roles might be. Create shadowing experiences for individuals, again, who might be at the beginning level of their career, and maybe they are underrepresented individuals, so that they can learn more about the organization, especially folks who might be coming from outside of the industry or outside of the geography, if you will, and this might be a new space for them. Giving those shadowing and intentional learning opportunities could be very critical. Again, going back to this construction employer that I'm working with, what they've decided to do in 2021 is to have 4 general quarterly educational sessions that anyone can be a part of. And it's some forklift construction things that I'm not so familiar with, but they want to create more opportunity for all people to learn, which is exciting. All right, I'm not going to go over every single thing because I want to give some opportunity for questions. But this is a great slide with lots of different things that you can do to create an inclusive workplace, many of which we've talked about before, but this will be one slide, again, take a picture of it, that you can go to when you're thinking about your strategy, whether it's looking at art and culture, how that shows up in your actual built environment. Does it look inclusive? If it's creating a DE&I employee-driven team, we've talked about diversity sponsorship programs. It might be lifting up national heritages that are observed by your team. If you have individuals from the Latinx or Africa, reaching out and finding out what customs are they celebrating? How can we elevate and educate some of our other colleagues who might not celebrate or know these things so we can be more educated about all of our colleagues? So that is a great thing for a beginning DE&I council to do. Look at your employee benefits. Are you thinking holistically about employee benefits? Is there same-sex benefits? Is there adoption benefits? Juneteenth, we've talked about that as a holiday observance. Is there an opportunity to think differently about how you celebrate together? But these are some great examples of areas that you could put into practice. And again, not doing them all at once, I get it. But I think it's also important to remember there's multiple pathways to success to this work. While there are best practices that I've tried to illuminate throughout this series, this slide is an example of initiatives that you could put into place to begin your work at creating inclusive workplace practices. It's important to post things, to say them out loud, visible non-discrimination policies, having open door policies that are coupled with non-retaliation wording. So keep those things in mind as you're trying to create a more inclusive workplace. So I'm curious, as we begin to wrap up, one of the best practices is definitely to create a DE&I employee council team. So I'm wondering, of these businesses that are attending and have been attending, do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion employee-driven council or team? Yes, no, not so sure. And maybe you're starting to get ready about what this team might look like and trying to put them into play. Because that is one of the best practices, that this isn't just driven by leaders of an organization, but it's driven by employees as well. And that your DE&I councils are representative of your employee base, that it is looking diverse from backgrounds, worldviews, job positions, job levels, geography, if you've got some different locations in your community or in your state. So I'm curious if any of you have those councils in place or are thinking about them. So I'll give you just another brief second. All right. All right, it looks like some of you do have a council in place, which is exciting to hear. Some of you don't, so here's an opportunity if this is a space that you want to find yourselves in 21, and it looks like some are also getting ready. So across the gamut. All right, then finally, before we get to some questions, these are things that I've tried to elevate throughout, and I just want to continue to drive it home. So instantly, you know that this is a value to your business when you commit to DE&I. We know lower attrition and turnover happens because you are really being inclusive. You're expressing care and value for all people. That's going to help build your employer brand, and your employees are going to start to go out into the marketplace and the community and say, wow, I work for a great employer. That's where you're going to get a new talent from referrals. And that's an incredibly exciting thing when your employees refer people in. Your partnerships with schools will increase because, back to what I said earlier, this is something that high schools, colleges, technical schools are teaching their students because they believe this is a value to us as employers to help create a better workplace. And it definitely puts you as being more employee-centric, valuing your employees first. When we do that, great things happen in our business, which is going to help reduce that reputation risk. Because at the beginning, I talked about if we're not intentional about our employer brand and defining it how we want it to be defined, our ex-employees will walk out that door and they will really talk in a way that we don't want to. So I wanted to leave some time for questions since we've missed those opportunities. We've got about 6 minutes left. If anything was popped in chat, would love to hear from you about anything I might be able to clarify in terms of all of this content today.
Hi, Kira. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation this morning and the phenomenal content that you were able to cover. Truly exceptional once again. We do have a handful of questions for you this morning, but a reminder to the audience that you can keep sending them in through the Q&A chat option, and we'll get through as many as we can here over the next 5 minutes or so. But Kira, the first question for you circles back to one of the first areas that you talked about. Are there times where it is required, or when employers are trying to enhance their brand, that it requires a staff or personnel change for them to truly be successful in enhancing that employer brand?
Thanks for that good question. And this is something we talk about internally with my organization, is that when we're trying to live into something, that an employee, whether it's a leader or whoever it is in the organization, if they are not aligning with who we want to be as a company, our mission, vision, and values, and DE&I certainly is supposed to be part of all of those things if you commit to. And yes, there are times that we have to say to a colleague that maybe this alignment is not best for you. It seems that some of the values that we have in an organization may not align with your values and beliefs. And, team member, I want to say that very respectfully, because we're all different. But this is an organization that really values all people. And we see this not only as a business differentiator, but as a way that we want to come to work. And we would be happy to maybe work with you to find another business opportunity that might be a better match for you. So that was me trying to be very correct in my language and encouraging. But yes, there are times when we have to make hard decisions, and it aligns with, if this is the organization we want to be, then all of us have to get in the boat and row in that direction, or be that beacon light on the hill, whatever metaphor you want. And if someone is undermining those efforts, we know that one toxic team member can pull the carpet out from under us. So hard conversations may have to happen.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I have another one for you, and this is kind of a 2-3-parter. So if there's any section that you'd like me to repeat, please just let me know. How do you recommend organizations identify pay inequities that may exist? And additionally, what is the best way for employers to address them? And then conversely, on the other end, as an employee, if you feel you may be subject to pay inequities, or you feel they may exist within your workplace, how would you recommend that they navigate through addressing that?
Great question. So the first step that I would invite you to do is have a conversation with your leadership team about the importance of this. And again, if you are committing to being an organization, a DE&I organization, it's important that your behaviors, your practices, your policies align. So have the conversation, and then it would really be doing a study on your pay. And there's a couple ways to slice and dice the data. One of those ways would be looking at job codes, and then the people in those job codes, maybe what their age is, what their gender is, if you gather information about race, ethnicity. I mean, right now, that's really what employers gather. We don't gather the rest of the honeycomb, if you will, because that's not really part of the EEOC, if you will, or some compliance practices. Now, there are different ways to do that, and we can talk about that another time. But that's the first step, is to know what your baseline is. Really look at the different job codes, age, gender, professional or persons of color, ethnicity, whatever you collect, and try to see if there's any disparities. Look at it in terms of how long those individuals have been with your organizations, and measure that out. That's a great way to kind of slice and dice to see, is there any gender inequity here, or is there parity? And we're seeing that. And then the next space might be, I'll just allude to some demographic types of things. When you're seeing people in those different job codes and roles, are you just seeing them in the entry level or the middle level? Or are there people in different grades of job, levels of jobs? And then make sure you evaluate their pay in the higher level grades of jobs as well, based on that gender, person of color / ethnicity, and age, and see if you see some disparities. Now, we know with age comes wisdom for the most part. I hope that's what people are saying about my age. So someone who's younger may not be making the same as someone who's older. We know that tenure has something to do with wage, and that's okay. But when they're around the same and there's a gender, age, professional, person of color, ethnicity difference, that's where you want to highlight that and say, this might be an opportunity for us to do some evaluation and maybe bring this person or these groups of people or this demographic up over time. It's not something you're going to do the next year because we can't do that as businesses. We have to continue to operate businesses, but you can identify it and then create a plan going forward. If individuals feel like there might be some pay inequity, now, this is hard because some organizations might retaliate. If I go in and I don't feel safe, I might not have the outcome I want. So I would bring my HR partner with me to have my conversation with my hiring manager or my supervisor. And I would directly say, I'm so curious about where I might be on the pay scale as it relates to, and, for me, it might be men. I might be interested in that statistic and that data. And those are appropriate things to ask. The hard thing is, though, that I can't control, friends, is how the response is going to be. So that's why I always bring my HR partner, because they're going to be the people person advocate.
Awesome. Thank you for that wonderful answer, all of those wonderful answers. As we just crossed the 11 o'clock hour, I want to be respectful of your time, Kier, but there are still two questions that I really want to get answered.
Yep.
The first of which is, at a time when we are lacking in-person interactions and many employees, like yourself, are working from home, how do you recommend that organizations and employers maintain their organizational culture and are able to continue to enhance their employer brand?
Yeah, it's so hard right now, isn't it? Gosh, it's just hard. And we need a lot of emotional endurance right now. And I say that for myself. And it is important to be intentional. And, I recognize that I have access to Zoom, a platform. Some companies don't have access to this type of thing. Some companies are essential, and I'm so thankful for organizations who are doing this work in their businesses to keep our societies up and running. So thank you for that, especially our healthcare folks. But it is really critical, especially as leaders, to make sure that we're reaching out to our team. When we think of mental health as an example on the diversity spectrum, it's definitely exacerbated right now. And feelings of isolation, anxiety, depression, these are not unusual feelings for any of us to have. So a lot of intention. Again, here's the intention. Here's the doing the hard work. And this is important for us to do is, I have a tag up, a 30-minute tag up with each one of my team members every other week. And I make myself available to them. And we have a Zoom. If you don't have Zoom, call them on the phone. And sometimes we're just talking about our families and, what it's like to get groceries or order groceries right now. We have Zoom happy hours or coffees where, and people are pooped of Zoom too. So you've got to honor that some people will show, other people won't. But that's a way to stay connected. We do music trivia. We did a Halloween scary show trivia. And leaders just take turns rotating and inviting people. And it's just a way to stay connected with our team. We have town halls. I think I shared earlier in our session, we did a Black Lives Matter MMA Voices town hall to elevate our Black colleagues and have those conversations. And in another week, we're doing MMA Voices Veterans. So we do try. And I think that's the effort right now, friends. For those of you who are leading organizations or leading people, sometimes it's just writing someone a card. And I put cards in the mail left and right these days. And I receive them left and right. And that's different. But I think in COVID-19 land, that's been something. So any way that you can reach out and care for people, diversity, definitely important in the space, but I think all people is really critical. And get intentional as a leadership team about dividing up and conquering the responsibility, but have a strategy around it, because I think we're going to be here at least into first quarter and other estimates are through second quarter. So we've got to find ways to keep engaged. That was kind of rambly, but I appreciate the question so much. Be intentional and do the hard work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kira. And I think exactly like you said, it's very difficult, if not impossible, at times to maintain, solid connections, even with your coworkers at times when we're all working from home. So thank you for that wonderful answer. Then the final question here before we turn it over to you to wrap up this session for us today. And this goes back to your final polling question, but for those organizations that do not have a diversity, equity, and inclusion team within their workplace, how do you recommend that they start one, and what are some of the key first steps to begin?
Well, Mason, I think that could be a great another webinar at some point. But here's just some easier best practices. To build that framework, it really is, I bet lots of you have had wellness committees in the past, worksite wellness. That was an engagement strategy. I did a lot of consulting around that space. And it's very much the same of bringing together, again, a diverse committee, a diverse team, and diversity in the big honeycomb aspect, representing different parts of your organization, and then really creating, why are we a team? What are we going to do as a team? So before you really put together that team, it's probably good to go to your leadership team and identify, is this a thing we're going to be doing, leaders? Are we committed to this? What does our commitment look like? Because you want to know what that is before you form your team, as opposed to forming your team and then communicating up. You want to have that buy-in, because that's how your team is going to say, okay, we're going to do something as a company. My leaders are behind this. So creating that team, understanding your why, and then it's basically building out a framework. What are some things that DE&I teams do? They do a lot around lifting up our diverse colleagues and education. So it might be a quarterly education. And when you think about your cultural communities, if you have some in your organization, it might be around lifting them up, celebrating, learning about their customs. If you don't have a ton of diversity yet in your organization, but you're practicing, it might be looking at national heritage observances and lifting those up and doing some education. And if you just Google that, you'll be able to find a quick 16 of them and popping them on your calendar. And so really look at your D&I team as more of the culture building effort, as the hands and feet to go out and spread the vision for the top organization. And then look at them as maybe helping to foster learning and development. So example, my team, what they do is bi-monthly, they put together an email communication of a cultural heritage, a national observance around DE&I, and they educate about it. They provide some links, maybe some books, and that's their communication. And then monthly, as a region, we have something called a Grow Talk, and that focuses on DE&I. And a member of the local teams throughout our region, again, this could just be your local team in your office, they take turns facilitating. Maybe it's a video this month on veterans. Maybe it's a video on microaggressions, like a TED Talk. And then they invite team members to it virtually, and then that colleague leads it. And I help facilitate the training of the DE&I team to be facilitators and that type of thing. But HR doesn't need to do it all the time. Your DE&I educator or your OD person, because I know DE&I educators are a new thing, empower your team to do that so they can be your hands and feet. Great place to start. You don't have to do it all at once. Hopefully that gave you enough.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kira, for the wonderful presentation, as I said today. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for any last remarks and to close up for us.
Thank you so much, Mason. I appreciate the questions. So appreciate your reflections. And I can't believe next Thursday is going to be our last session together on creating a DE&I scorecard. And we will be talking about how to define what you want to measure and what success looks like. And again, I'm going to try to create 15 minutes of the presentation so we can just do a Q&A and look back on the last 6 weeks. And this diversity scorecard is going to be simplified at the beginner level. So just know that wherever you are, there's going to be something for you next week. Mason, thank you. And he will be sending out the link to this webinar so you can share it with your colleagues, watch it again, download it, however that might work for you. And I'm grateful for all of you leaning in, and I will look forward to seeing you next Thursday.